sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for. When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth. In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hey, everybody, all our dear listeners out here. Welcome to another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I'm Ethan Nash, one of your co-hosts here. And with me today, I have my partner in crime, as usual, Mr. Mike Nash. Mike, say hello.
Yeah, good to be here.
It is very good to be here. Very good to be here. Look, let's jump right into it today. In our last episode, we did part one of our mini series on managing for fairness in the workplace. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back, start there. It's going to add a lot of needed context for this episode. But let's just briefly review kind of the main punchlines of last episode to give everybody a refresh here. Mike, why don't you start? What are some of the main points that we covered?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think the first thing is just how important this is, right? That people are geared up. Based on our evolutionary history, they're super sensitive to being treated unfairly because, our ancient ancestors, if they were treated unfairly, they would die, right? So it's built into us to be super aware and have it on our radar and be really sensitive. So managers just have to be managing for this. From there, we dug into what is favoritism? It's that idea of treating people more favorably than others, either based on conscious bias or unconscious bias. Ethan, just take a couple moments on that. Bias, unconscious bias. What are we talking about?
Yeah, bias. I mean, the basic dictionary definition of bias is, a preference or inclination, especially one that inhibits impartial judgment. So an unconscious bias is going to be, it really refers to prejudiced or unsupported judgment in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared to another. And of course, as it implies with the unconscious, that is happening in our subconscious. We're not totally aware we have these biases, but they show up in terms of our behaviors outwardly. Right. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk with biases. And then we, dialogue a little bit about, where these come from, why we have them, and that really biases simplify the world for us by creating these mental shortcuts and giving us quick and often inaccurate information about, what is good or bad or safe or unsafe or trustworthy or untrustworthy. And so it is a useful mechanism that allowed us to save cognitive energy to focus on our survival by quickly grouping things together. But we've carried these biases with us into obviously modern day, where they serve us a whole heck of a lot less than they did, many, many eons ago.
Yeah. And I like the way you said this last time. You said, if you have a brain, you have bias. And I think it's that idea that we all have this. It's built in. We need to be compassionate toward ourselves as we discover these things. And also the reminder that, they're still adaptive, right? They're still helpful. I prefer things over other things. I prefer certain behaviors over others. That still keeps me safe. It still helps me live a good life. There's nothing wrong with this. It's when they're unconscious and we're not aware of them, and they then can get in our way. And like you said, they can lead to reinforcing stereotypes and, causing harm. But we dug into some examples, right? We talked about gender, race, physical attractiveness, dialect, and some real more subtle ones. We talked about the proximity bias, that we might prefer people that are closer to us physically. We talked about the behavioral bias.
Yeah, certain behaviors, tend to get more rewarded in the workplace environment. And these include, people that are just more talkative, tend to use more airtime in meetings and other places, people that just chat people up more. We also talked about, people that are likely to ask for what they want and what they need are going to be more rewarded and get those needs met. which again isn't a bad thing that you're meeting those needs, but it's considering what about the people that aren't necessarily as assertive and asking for those things.
Right.
So if those are a few of those behaviors that tend to be more rewarded.
Yeah. And then we, kind of the punchline, I think, I don't know if you agree with me, Ethan, but what I think was the most important thing we did last episode was we talked about the need for a manager to embark on that self-discovery, right? To become, to practice self-awareness, to practice humility, to learn about their biases, to ask questions of others, to ask for feedback, to read, to listen to podcasts, right? To just become more aware. And I just ask Ethan again, why does that matter? Why is that important for a manager to become aware of their unconscious biases?
Well, I guess to put it simply, awareness is the precursor to growth and development, right? You don't get to jump right into changing, your behaviors or biases without becoming aware of how your biases may be showing up and what they are. And so, I mean, it's simple in concept, not necessarily in practice, but it's going out and being intentional about seeking resources or conversations in which will shed some light on kind of what's going on in your blind spots. Right. And so we mentioned some resources that we linked in the last episode show notes that people might want to check out.
And then lastly, we talked about what the organization can do, right, to help managers to grow and to be aware of their biases. And it's everything from, the big one for me is providing management training. Don't do the Peter Principle. Welcome to management. Good luck. Provide DEI work training. And we gave some hints as to kind of some research-based thoughts on which of those programs tend to be more effective and maybe which might actually cause a little bit more harm. So again, the organization can promote awareness along these lines, and that's really important. Which leads us to today. Ethan, what are we doing today?
Today, we're going to continue that conversation here, and we're going to get, I'm hoping, practical and actionable today, right? Mm-hmm. That's the goal. And by that, I mean, we want to talk about some different manager mindsets and behaviors that might make it less likely that employees will experience actual or perceived favoritism. And so we really have, I would call it maybe 5 big bang for your buck manager mindsets and behaviors and things for them to keep on their radar that will help create these workplaces that are centered around fairness. I'm just going to share the kind of these 5 mindsets and behaviors to give you a quick summary of them. And then we're going to get into each one individually and add some more details and some actionable steps for those. And so, number 1, be aware of the friend factor. Number 2, remember that time with the leader is a commodity. And number 3, communicate changes and decisions proactively and consistently. And number 4, ask for input on decisions and include everyone when applicable. And the last one, number 5, is ask for feedback, listen, and grow. So those are the 5, and let's spend some time on each one now. And these aren't in any, rank order or anything necessarily, but number 1 is beware of the friend factor. Break that one down for us, will you?
Yeah, this is something that we have run into this a lot in working with clients. It's that dilemma we end up in when we are managers and we are also friends with somebody that we supervise. And this is really important that we have this on our radar, that we're, I would say, intentional about making the right moves here, because I want to start with this idea. I don't know if you agree with this, Ethan, but there's nothing inherently wrong with being friends with somebody you supervise. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And sometimes it's out of your control, right? Like if you were friends before you got promoted, for example, and now you're the manager, well, you're just going to stop being friends with them. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that inherently. It's how you manage those friendships in the workplace that matters the most.
Yeah. Thanks for being in my wedding, but I'm not your friend anymore because I just got promoted, right? that's
right.
What happened, right? And so, friends, meaning what I mean by that is, this is a person you might hang out with, right? Outside of work. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but let's talk about maybe some things that a manager can do, because here's the problem, right? Remember that favoritism, whether it's real or perceived, it doesn't really matter. right? The impact is the same. Perception is reality. So we're not only having to manage our own actual favoritism, we actually have to manage the perceived favoritism as well. And what happens when you're already, let's say, sensitive to issues of unfairness as an employee because you're a human and you have someone with a power differential, as you said really well last episode, Ethan. So now I noticed that my manager is friends with this colleague of mine, right? I know they're friends. I just know because I know, right? I know they were friends before, for example, before my manager became my manager. So now I'm already in this sort of deficit, kind of my warning radar's out. I'm wondering what's going on here. I'm already overly sensitive to this. And suddenly that colleague of mine just got an assignment that I wished I would have got, right? Or that person got some praise in the staff meeting. Oh, yeah, you know what? That's so unfair. They're friends, and that's why that's happening, right? You see that negativity bias that you talked about last time, Ethan, just shows up there. So what can I do as a manager to make that less likely? And let's maybe share some thoughts on this. I'll start with this. If I do end up in a situation and I am a manager and I'm friends with one of my employees, it's really important that I have a conversation with that friend and that we talk about the fact that this now is a little bit fraught, right? This situation we're in could cause other people to be uncomfortable. So let's at least talk about this and let's make some decisions. Let's make some agreements so that we don't inadvertently create a problem at work that didn't need to be created. And what might that conversation consist of? I'll just mention one thing here. We might say, for example, hey, you know what? Let's not, when we're at work, let's just not talk about the stuff we're doing outside of work, right? I'm not saying pretend we're not friends. That's dumb. But, let's not go to work and sit and talk about, private jokes or talk about that football game we went to together last weekend, right? That's just kind of throwing it in everyone's face that we're friends, which is going to create fear. So let's just not have those conversations. What else, Ethan? As I'm talking to that friend, what might I establish?
Well, I think you can take what you said and look at the other side of that as well, which is that, yeah, let's not talk about what we're doing outside of work at work. And let's not talk about work outside in our, friendship, social settings, yes. Right? It's, even if you're thinking, well, we're talking about it in private, you're still sharing information with an employee about work that other people aren't necessarily getting. And that can end up kind of showing up to the rest of the team, right? Just based on things they hear this other person, learn from you or whatever it may be. So Don't talk about work in friendship time. Don't talk about friendship time at work.
I like that. It's kind of two categories, right? Like you just said. I think that's what that conversation would look like. I might also, I guess I would add this. I would also maybe commit to that person that, hey, look, I'm going to do my best to manage you the way I manage everyone else. It'd be really a negative thing if I was to show any kind of favoritism or even reverse favoritism, right? And let's get into that. So, with this friend now at work, I mean, here's the obvious thing: don't show favoritism, right? I mean, that sounds obvious, but if there's the kind of behavior that I might correct over here with David in accounting, my buddy acts the exact same way and does the same behaviors, and I'm not correcting him, that's a problem, right? That's gonna show up. So I have to be really cautious that I don't show favoritism in that way or in assignments or in opportunities. I just have to be really careful that I'm creating an equal playing field. And I would probably ask my friend to, maybe talk to me if he or she notices something like that, right? If they see something that could be perceived as favoritism, maybe they can talk to me about it. And then avoid the reverse favoritism. I've run into this a couple of times, which is great. I'm friends with the boss and I get the short end of the stick every single time because my boss is so worried about showing favoritism, so I'm basically now, not getting what everyone else is getting. So this is a really fine dance. It's a difficult dance.
Yeah. Let me add one more here, which is, just remembering not to share inside information with them as well. Like we already talked about, don't talk about work outside of work with them. Mm-hmm. But whether outside of work or inside of work, remember you're always wearing your management hat. and you can't give information just because they're your friend that you're not providing to other people. And so you have to be able to set that boundary with them and just get them to understand, like, there are things that are going to be off limits that I can't talk to you about. Or if I am going to talk with you about them, it's something I got to talk to the rest of my team about.
Yeah, that's a really
Sure.
good point. I'm glad you said that. You made a statement just now. There's things you can't talk about. Just be clear about that with your buddy. There's certain things that if you were my friend that works someplace else, I could come to you and I could bounce some things off you, around the work about my work situation, right? I'm having some frustrations with an employee, and you're my buddy who lives in another state, and I'm going to call you up and brainstorm with you. That's fantastic. That's perfect. I can't do that with you, right? Because you work here. Mm-hmm. So I can't air my grievances or my frustrations or ask for advice about things that I wouldn't be asking others about. So I'm glad you made that point. That's really important.
Good. And then the other piece here that applies to this friendship factor piece, that's also our next point here, is to remember that time with the leader is a commodity, right? So first, let's take that in the context of having a friend at work. I think everything we just said about having a friend at work applies here, right? Just because they're your friend, you can't spend more time with them, meaning, you can't be, going to lunch with them more often than you go with other people. You can't be calling them into your office for conversations and brainstorming more than other people. So time is a commodity there. And I think where this often shows up is when we have a friend at work. But even if you're not necessarily friends with your employees, like you're not hanging out and, going to Broadway on the weekend together, you still got to remember time is a commodity.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You got to spend time relatively equally with everyone, one-on-one time, like I said, times having meals together, whatever. As soon as other employees see that you're spending more time with others, or there's a perception of that, they're going to go into, essentially fear mode about this, right? This person is getting privileges that I'm not getting, and therefore this isn't necessarily a safe environment for me. So time with the leader is a commodity, and it's one of the biggest commodities, and you got to remember that.
Yeah, that's really well put. And a little more on that, because there's also some exceptions to keep in mind on that. But yeah, and I like that you said kind of relatively equal. We're not, don't keep track by minutes. Don't make a spreadsheet about this. But it's in general. We've talked about one-on-ones. I'm having one-on-ones with everybody, right? That's pretty equal. If I'm going to be doing sort of like coffee or lunch with employees, divvy that up as equally as possible. If you've got, like you said, people coming into your office and chatting you up, and you've got maybe one or two people that tend to do a lot of that, you might have to push back a little bit, have some boundaries around that. At the same time, there's exceptions, and it's real life stuff. I'm working on a project with this employee. Just make sure everyone knows that, there's that then eases their mind. On the other hand, I've got an employee that needs some extra coaching, that needs some extra, I need to help them maybe change some behaviors or grow some skills. It's okay to take the long view on this, right? Just kind of step back and sort of assume that your employees can over time see that there's going to be seasons where you're spending more time with some people than others, but it's not permanent, right? It just kind of generally works itself out in the wash and kind of rotates around.
Some really good points there. One I'm taking away from that is, if you're working with an employee or certain employees because you're working on projects, communicate it. I think that's often where people get hung up, is they just didn't communicate why they're meeting with this person more, and there's actually really practical reasons. And then the other thing to remember is, like, not to get too rigid about this time as a commodity thing, meaning when we're talking about an equitable workplace, that doesn't mean you treat everybody the exact same, right? Mm-hmm. There are going to be people you may need to spend more time with for whatever reason. And those reasons might not be things you can just communicate out to the rest of your team, right? And so I like what you're saying here of just like, take the kind of the long-term view of this and recognize that like right now, I might be spending more time with this person. Later, I might be spending more time with others. And then I think with that one, you're just also communicating to people and making it clear of kind of what do you mean when you're talking about equity in the workplace, right? And that it's not treating everybody the exact same, right? So just a couple sub points I wanted to add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The proximity and the behavioral bias shows up here too. I want to remind our listeners that we sometimes as managers, we forget that we need to be the ones equalizing and initiating, right? So we can make that mistake of, just a little bit of an analogy, but back when I used to work with families, I remember talking with this one mom, and her daughter had just turned 21 or something. And the daughter said to her mom how hurt she was, the daughter was, that during many of her teenage years, her mom didn't seem to want to spend time with her. And the mom was kind of brokenhearted hearing this, that her daughter was hurt, because what the mom experienced was this teenage girl pushing her away. She didn't seem to want to spend time with mom. So mom just assumed, well, I don't want to push past her boundaries, and I'm just not going to spend time with her. And a little bit of an analogy here, right? I might have someone in the workplace who's not as assertive, who doesn't network as much, who's not maybe as physically close. Maybe they work from home, and I might just make some assumptions as a manager that they don't really want to spend time with me, or that I don't really need to kind of pursue because they don't seem to be pursuing me. And I just want to remind managers that that's not how it works. We need to be the ones who kind of think about the needs of our employees and making sure that we spend the appropriate amount of time with them.
Yeah. Well said. So number 3 here is communicate changes and decisions proactively and consistently. Talk to me a little bit about that one. What are we talking about here, and how does this kind of look in practical terms?
Mostly what we're talking about is how to avoid the perception of unfairness, right? We're really trying to make it less likely that employees are going to kind of make up a story in their head about unfairness, when in fact it's not really favoritism. So, I mean, obviously the best antidote to that sort of negativity bias is information, is just giving people more information. So when I'm making a change that's going to impact different people in different ways, well, explain it. Talk about the reasons this decision was made. What's the hope for outcomes? What problem were we trying to solve? Anytime you get a chance to explain decisions or changes so that people can fill in the blanks, because you remember that, we've said this here before, that old kind of Native American proverb, if you give me a blank, I'll fill it in with demons, right? If I don't know what's happening, I go to my negativity bias. This decision was made. I don't really like the way it's impacting me versus the way it seems to be impacting this other person. I'm going to make up a story of unfairness. No, give me information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the most powerful tweaks a manager can make that can totally change the dynamics of the team, which is, like you said, communicating the why behind decisions.
Yes.
Right? Most people are okay with decisions most of the time, as long as there's some explanation behind it. It's when there's not the explanation behind it that, like you said, we make up stories in our head, and it becomes often about fairness, because that's one of the main things we're scanning our environment for, right? And so I like that. Communicate changes and decisions proactively and consistently. I think this could also mean like communicate the information to everybody within a relatively, similar time frame, right? Where I often see people run into trouble, including myself, is I plan to communicate this to everybody, but I communicate it to these 2 people this one day, and then I don't get to communicate it to the other people until next week for whatever reason. Well, in the meantime, they might be hearing kind of things that you communicated to these people that they didn't hear yet. And they're already thinking, why did I not hear this as well? Right? That seems unfair. So I always suggest, look, if you're going to do it, I suggest maybe if it's communicate it in a group setting to everybody at once, and then you can have some follow-up discussions and one-on-one with everybody. But make sure people are generally getting the same message at generally the same time. And I've seen that really help a team just kind of create that sense of fairness, or improve it rather.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I like when you can doing it in person so people can ask questions. You can, again, it's more opportunities to help close those gaps so they don't have to make things up. This is all really hard, and this can be difficult in those workplaces where you're just super busy. I don't have time. I don't have time to communicate. I don't have time to have meetings. Man, the time that it costs you though, when people end up perceiving favoritism and then how that impacts morale, man, you don't have time for that. So yeah, find the time to get ahead of the stuff and get proactive in your communication. And the cool thing about this is, we go back to the SCARF model. We talked about that in the last episode. I won't go into the details here, but it's cool because when there's a potential threat to the fairness domain, you can quite often mitigate that by rewarding certainty, right? The C in SCARF stands for certainty. Giving people more information can really offset that tendency to move into a fairness concern.
Yes. Agree. I agree with all of that. Anything more you want to say about this one here?
No, that's good. That's good. We've got beware of the friend factor. We've got time is a commodity, and we've covered communicate changes and decisions proactively.
Awesome. So then the fourth one is ask for input on decisions and include everyone when applicable. And I want you to start this one, if you will, just because this is something that I know you feel very passionately about. What are we talking about here? What does this look like?
It's interesting to me how often people end up kind of harboring concerns about fairness or favoritism. They don't say anything, and it can be a while before it actually comes out, which is unfortunate because it festers at that point. And it can often be because people just don't feel respected. They don't feel like their opinions being asked. They find out that other people's opinions were asked. Maybe it's a matter of managers making decisions in a vacuum, or what appears to be in a vacuum, meaning that it doesn't look like they really asked any of us what our opinions are. And so it's easy to say, well, that's not a very fair decision. The manager's kind of acting out of self-interest or not really caring about us. Or manager only asked his friends or her, people that were closer to her in the office, that kind of thing. So it's just that, going back to, we've had episodes on the decision-making model, the 6 different ways of deciding. It's just being, I would say, intentional about, if you don't have to use a style 1, which is just making a decision without input. There's nothing wrong with those, by the way, but if you don't have to, if there's the option to use a style 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, which is just different variations of getting other people involved, go ahead and do it, right? Ask people's opinions. If you're kind of partway to a decision and you want to check with people first what they think, that's a style 2. I won't go through the styles here today, but getting people involved. And then when you choose to do that, here's the point: doing that fairly, doing that equitably, right? So don't just ask the people that are more physically close to you, or just the people that, maybe more likely to speak out, but go through the process of seeking people's opinion in an even manner.
Nice. I will link to the decision-making styles episode in the show notes. That will be a good one to review, again, to add some more context to this. But let's move on to our final one, number 5, which I kind of consider this the behavior of all these behaviors, which is regularly ask for feedback, right? That's how you grow. Listen and grow. And this includes everything from, asking maybe what gaps employees are experiencing regarding fairness. Right. Part of this comes back to that self-awareness piece we talked about in the last episode and the beginning of this episode. You don't know what you don't know. And the best way to find out is by asking. And so I encourage people to kind of make this a regular part of their conversations they have with employees. Like, maybe not something you have every day or every week or every month, but periodically checking in to say, hey, what gaps are you experiencing here regarding fairness in the workplace? Do you feel like you're being treated fairly? And you can start to collect some data information so you can adjust some of your choices and behaviors. And this also just includes, when you are asking for this feedback, you're seeking to understand, right? Not to reply and not to defend. And this is particularly important here because when we're asking people about what they're experiencing in terms of fairness or biases in the workplace, that's a pretty sensitive subject. And nobody likes to be told that they are being unfair. And so you really have to self-regulate a little bit here and make sure you're seeking to understand and get out of that kind of defensive mode here.
There's a little bit of a roadblock or a barrier here, I think, on this one in terms of asking about this with employees. It's almost one of those unmentionable things. It's one of those topics that as managers, we just hope never comes up, right? We just hope it just is not a problem. We hope it kind of isn't, I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't want to ask. I'm almost afraid if I ask, I'm stirring it up. And I know this is difficult. I empathize with this, but to be willing to, again, remember, if you have a brain, you have bias, right? And I'm not aware of many of my biases. That's why they're called unconscious biases. And I might not know the way my friendships are showing up at work or the perceptions, because I can't control other people's perceptions, right? I just don't know what I don't know. And so I just echo what you said, Ethan, that I encourage managers, not super frequently, but, really occasionally to just make this their topic, maybe in their one-on-one cycle. Hey, I want to know, we all have biases. I have biases. Are you seeing anything? What are you seeing? Are you, have you noticed anything either toward you or toward others that could be perceived as favoritism? So I just want to echo that. Looking for those kind of data points is really important. And I hate to just keep saying, yeah, what he said, but I love that, you're getting to that piece about not being defensive, because man, the worst thing you can do is say, hey, can you, tell me a place where I might be showing up, showing favoritism. And they say, yeah, well, it was when you made this decision. Well, you don't understand. Let me, and you start explaining and defending. It's much less likely that person's going to respond next time you ask a question like that.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the ways to maybe get yourself out of defensive mode when you ask these questions is to remember what we've said multiple times now, that whether it is truly unfairness or the perception of unfairness, it doesn't matter. And I think that's where we're going to get most offensive, is if people, call out a behavior that maybe I'm doing as a leader, and we're just thinking, oh, they don't get the full story here. It's just the perception.
Yes.
Doesn't matter. What matters is that you've created the perception, and now that's information for you to have to make some adjustments so that perception doesn't show up. So again, don't get caught up on what's true and what's not true. Focus on what that other person is experiencing from you, because that's what matters here.
Yeah, that's really good. And let me just clarify, one slight thing, you might not have created the perception, right? I just want to keep open to the idea that you might have had nothing to do with creating this perception. It's you're just doing your job, and you're actually, you made a decision that needs to be made, right? And you did your thing. What you're saying is spot on either way. It is about perception. And something that we mentioned earlier, I think it was last episode, I just have to remind myself and remind managers sometimes, when you do find out that there's been a perception, and it might even be really hard to hear, right? It might come out as an accusation, right? It might come out as people, complaining. You might hear about it behind your back. However it shows up, try to avoid that idea that, oh, that's people are whining. They're worried about fairness. Why can't you grow up? Don't be children. I just stop and think again about the idea that, of course, people are really, really sensitive to these things. Of course, they're going to make up their stories about this. It just is part of being human. So I think that helps us to have more grace and compassion, and makes it much more likely that we're going to respond to people with compassion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's also going to, one thing that will allow you to, really be able to take some of this feedback better as well, is to have some empathy and get in the shoes of some other people, right? If I'm a white male that's a manager, right, I might not be totally aware of why, a Black female might be feeling experience of unfairness, right? Because I don't understand what it's like to be, in their shoes and what they've experienced throughout their life. And so this is kind of part of going back to, growth and development and understanding people, engaging in anti-bias work, engaging in practices of empathy, because I can now then understand that, hey, whether it's perception or not, I can understand why this might be showing up to somebody else in the workplace.
Yeah. And speaking of difficult conversations, right? What you just said there, Ethan, man, I mean, how much courage does it take to actually have that conversation, right? To have your one-on-one with a person of a different gender or a different race, and to actually lean into that and ask questions and be open and learn. I mean, that's high level stuff. And I just really encourage our managers to understand that finding that courage is really important.
I love it. And by the way, all of this here about asking for that feedback, another benefit that you get from this is you're actually modeling this behavior amongst your team. Right. It's obviously important that you can ask for feedback on this stuff and receive it non-defensively. But by doing that, you're also hopefully creating a safe environment for peers to do this with each other as well, right? You're kind of creating a cultural norm that we want to be able to talk about these things in this workplace. We don't want to brush these things under the rug. And so just remember, you're modeling and you're creating an environment of safety to have these conversations. That's another positive effect of this. So there you have it, folks. Those are 5, again, big bang for your buck manager behaviors and mindsets to work on to better manage for fairness. And again, this is beware of the friendship factor, remembering that time with the leader is a commodity, remembering to communicate decisions and changes proactively and consistently. It's asking for input on decisions and including everybody when you can, and then asking for feedback to listen and grow and model those behaviors. Mike, is there anything else you want to share with the audience here? Maybe, steps or actions they can take now that they have these things on their radar to make sure, they implement this into their day-to-day management?
I guess, I mean, probably by way of summary, I would say maybe 3 things to consider. And one is just going back again to really where we were at in our last episode, just being, maybe if you haven't already begun your own personal journey of kind of discovery around your biases, start there. The second thing I'd say is maybe the last thing we talked about, being willing to ask some questions, maybe in one of your upcoming one-on-ones about what people are experiencing, what they're perceiving, the degree to which people are experiencing a fair and equitable workplace. Maybe ask those questions. And then lastly, just kind of maybe take listen through these different steps and ideas and behaviors, and maybe pick a couple, pick maybe even one to put on your radar to focus on in the near future.
Good. Well, there you have it, everybody. By no means does that cover every single thing you should be thinking about to create a fair and equitable workplace. This is a very complicated topic, and it takes lots of work and practice, but I hope this gives you a place to start. And I hope, again, you get why this matters for your team, for your organization, and for yourself. Let me leave you with a couple asks of you. First and foremost, we have a monthly newsletter, just manager tips, tricks. I guess not a whole lot of tricks, but mostly tips and advice and actionable practical stuff that we share in these newsletters. You can get on that newsletter by texting the word leading to 66866. And also, if you're so inclined, please leave us a review for this podcast. That really helps other people find this show, and we would sure appreciate it. And that's all I have for you today. Mike, say goodbye or something like that.
Goodbye or something like that. Thanks everybody for being here.
All right. Bye, everybody.